Hey there, guys. Welcome to the Holy Shed. Thank you so much for joining me. And as you'll have gathered by now, I had to drop out of my usual deadline for this week's shed due to having to do work on the house. Very boring and very exhausting, as many of you will know. But here we are, a day late, buzzing and ready to go. Subject-wise, we're on a little bit of a roll in the shed at present on the theme Better Humans for a Better World, which arises partly from despair at the state of the world out there and partly from stuff I'm trying to write a book about. As I've said repeatedly, I see myself as both a Christian and a humanist. Two things often considered incompatible, if not sworn enemies, but which I believe belong together, not least because humanism grew out of Christianity in the first place, and now I believe it has got a lot to contribute in return. The thing is, contrary to what many experts expected, religion is going through something of a resurgence of significance in the world. Not necessarily in a good way, but it's happening. The election of Donald Trump to 2 terms of office as President of the States, which many of us see as disastrous for that country and for the wider world, just could not have occurred without massive support from white evangelical Christians. Around 80% of white evangelicals voted for Trump in 2024. And the upshot is a hugely increased level of influence for white evangelicals. It's worth noting, by the way, that after a meeting with Jerry Falwell, founder of the Moral Majority, Billy Graham commented, "It would disturb me if there was a wedding between the religious fundamentalists and the political right. The hard right has no interest in religion except to manipulate it." Well, can't say fairer than that. But the marriage is on, it's happening before our very eyes today, not just in America, but here in the UK as well, where right-wing activists and politicians are incorporating Christianity and what they like to call Judeo-Christian values into their nationalistic political agendas. I expect to see a rise in Christian nationalism in Britain as we go forward, both among certain church-going Christians, but also, and perhaps more significantly, among many who do not participate in any active personal faith, but who are co-opting very happily Britain's so-called Christian heritage in order to exclude and abuse people of other cultural and faith backgrounds. All of which is a backdrop to our theme over recent weeks, Better Humans for a Better World. And today, we focus on better religion for a better world. So here's a question. What constitutes better? What constitutes better in terms of religion and the world? For example, would a better world be one where most people were Christians and other faiths were kept in check? Or would it be a world where different religious traditions exist side by side in mutual respect and celebrating their diversity? You see, I think diversity, equality and inclusion, DEI, these 3 things, diversity, equality and inclusion, are really gospel values, which were exemplified in the life and teachings of Jesus. They're not antithetical to Christian faith, as some people would argue, but integral, right at the very heart of Christianity. So I wholeheartedly support Martin Luther King's vision of what he called a great world house. To quote him yet again, he said, "This is the great new problem of mankind. We have inherited a large house, a great world house, in which we have to live together, black and white, Easterner and Westerner, Gentile and Jew, Catholic and Protestant, Muslim and Hindu. A family unduly separated in ideas, culture and interest, who, because we can never again live apart, must learn somehow to live with each other in peace. And of course, the alternative to this, to that vision, which is one religious group asserting its supremacy and imposing its authority over all the rest, that, dear friends, is the stuff not only of repugnant religious nationalism, it's also the stuff of the Crusades. And who wants to go back to that? Who wants that kind of future for our kids? There are many ways to indicate or measure religious beliefs and traditions in terms of their usefulness, their goodness, their usefulness toward making the world a better place. One method, drawing on the work of a guy called George Lakoff, who is a philosopher and cognitive linguist, he identifies two religious mindsets leading to two distinct visions of God, what he calls the authoritative mindset and the nurturant mindset. And these two models, if you like, these two sort of ways of categorizing things would apply to lots of areas of life, as he does, but it's interesting thinking about them in the religious context. People who adopt an authoritative mindset toward faith and religion tend to envisage an all-powerful God, a cosmic judge, who punishes those who fail to comply with his rules and laws, who requires recompense for sin and demands obedience. And so people of that mindset will therefore prioritize things like religious and political hierarchy, obedience to rules, individual responsibility, absolute certainty about their views, and probably lean towards strong or even autocratic leadership styles in the church and maybe in society at large. People who adopt a nurturant mindset toward faith and religion, on the other hand, will envisage an uncontrolling God of love, a God who guides and supports but never coerces, who defends the disadvantaged and requires justice for the oppressed. And so people who take this mindset or this approach will therefore prioritize things like acceptance, empathy, cooperation, compassion, social justice, and open-mindedness, and are likely to support democracy in terms of the way in which things are run in the world and in the church. I doubt that anyone can finally resolve the old chicken and egg dilemma, but it seems clear to me that we end up with a God who matches the fundamental values and attitudes that we hold dear. Richard Kearney, a British philosopher, writes, "Tyrannical gods breed tyrannical humans." And of course, likewise, a nurturing God seeks to create empathetic, forgiving, and caring people. So the kind of God that we believe in and, seek to serve is hugely kind of creative in shaping who we are as people. Or chicken and egg, could be the other way around. In my book, The Bad Christian's Manifesto, How to Reinvent God and Other Modest Proposals, I drew on some research from the Baylor University in Texas to highlight two visions or two images of God that directly correspond to the things that I've just been saying. According to their research, 32% of Americans identify with an authoritarian God. Now, actually, more recent research says that that figure has gone up quite significantly. The trend is towards a more authoritarian vision of God and of the kind of leadership that we need, or that they need. And so 32% of Americans, according to that research, identify with an authoritarian God who is characterized by anger, righteous anger, of course, and willing to punish those who are unfaithful or who step out of line, or who behave in what may be deemed ungodly fashions. Retribution may be levelled on a large scale by this God through social disorder or natural disasters, or on a personal scale through illness and misfortune. So, when terrible things happen in the world or in people's lives, there's a good chance that God is behind it, this authoritarian God. It's the sort of God who turns up, of course, in parts of what we call the Old Testament, where God strikes down individuals or sends plagues on nations or sanctions the slaughter of hordes of people. And yet, according to the Baylor research, followers of this authoritarian God are actually quite likely to speak of him, and he definitely is a him, as loving and compassionate, which is strange and interesting, isn't it? Interesting that they find no, disconnect here, no contradiction between these two very different traits of character and behavior in a God who seems really a little bit mixed up as far as I can see. Now, in contrast to that, 23% of Americans in that research saw God as gentle, forgiving, and not likely to respond with wrath. Followers of a benevolent God have a sense that God is active in their lives and in the world, that God is empathetic and listens and cares about human suffering. And so both the authoritative and the benevolent gods are assumed to intervene in human affairs, but in different ways. In the face of tragedy, for example, someone with an authoritative view of God is likely to believe that God either caused or allowed the tragedy in order to teach somebody a lesson. Someone with a benevolent vision of God, however, is unlikely to see God's hand in creating disasters, but rather recognize God interacting with the suffering that is a consequence especially through the compassion and intervention of people who demonstrate practical love and care. So these are two very different visions of God, aren't they? Now listen, whenever we put things into either or terms, they get exaggerated, right? And in reality, there are probably a lot more people who have a little bit of a mixture of the two. But nevertheless, the binary helps to sort of just catalyze these two quite different approaches to religion and different approaches to understanding who and what God is. Interestingly, the neuroscientist Andrew Newberg, who carries out large-scale neurological research into the correlation between religion and brain science, suggests that these different personalities, if you like, or images of God, like authoritarian and benevolent, correspond to the neurological evolution and development of the brain. In fact, he goes so far as to argue that the authoritarian gods are associated with the oldest, most primitive structures of the brain, the reptilian sort of parts, whereas a benevolent notion of God is experienced through the most recently evolved parts of the brain, structures that appear to be, at the moment anyway, unique to human beings. So on that basis, I think we should assume that human progress and healthy evolution will involve moving forward, right, from the mentality of authoritarianism to one of empathy and mutuality, and that this should be reflected in our approach to religion or spirituality and our vision of God, which makes it all the sadder and bemusing, frankly, when we seem to be moving in the opposite direction, as appears to be happening definitely in some religious circles and also in the world at large. It's sad and bemusing and, regressive. Why is it that so many people in different parts of the world are turning to more authoritarian and autocratic styles of leadership? Why is there such fear of being overrun by different religious traditions or being swamped by people with different cultural heritages? Why are some Christians becoming obsessed with power, with a need to impose on others, their view of the world, their beliefs, their so-called values? Why do they need their faith tradition to be the one and only way to God or to truth? These are crucial questions, given the fact that we are supposed to be evolving into, kinder and more empathetic human beings. So whether in the wider political scene or in the specifically religious world, it seems as if fear is a massive factor in all of this. In a fascinating book called Believe Me, The Evangelical Road to Donald Trump, the historian John Fay says the playbook for getting evangelicals to vote for you involves fear, power, and nostalgia. Those three things, he says. If you're going to get their vote, it needs to involve fear, power, and nostalgia. And bear in mind that, John Fay, he is, an academic historian. He's also actually an evangelical Christian, though not a Trump supporter. And he says this, he says, you appeal to the evangelical fear that the broader culture is moving away from them, Then you promise to give them political power to enforce their values on society. And finally, you stoke the longing for a mythologized past when America was a Christian nation run by white Christian males. That, he said, is the playbook for getting the evangelical vote. And Trump, he says, followed that playbook almost to the letter by speaking of enemies destroying our values and promising to evangelicals to restore America to its greatness and to give them influence and power in society in a way that they feel that they've lost. So this is an analysis specific to the United States, but it highlights the same kind of issues in many places, including here in Britain. These are deeply uncertain times, and establishment politics and religion has largely lost the confidence of many people, who then become ripe pickings for autocratic political or religious leaders who claim to have the answers, who stick up two fingers to the establishment and promise to make everything right again, and promise to restore the sense of power and influence. Guys, we need a different kind of religion or spirituality, rooted in a different vision of God. I think we need what I often call a grown-up God for grown-up people, grown-up religion that empowers us to set aside fear and work together for something better in the world, even if it's only our little bit of the world that we can work in. The longing for an authoritative God, for authoritative religion, politics or whatever, for authoritarian saviors to come along is all deeply regressive. We're supposed to be better than that. We're supposed to be moving on from all of that kind of stuff. And yet we seem to have this, this force pulling us backward. And it is, these three words, the key words that John Fay says, fear and power and nostalgia, looking to some mythologized past, and finding the kind of people who seem able to lead us there. And for me, the great model of a different way is the figure of Jesus, the one that we follow. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus shows us the way of love, in contrast to those who worshipped the way of power I mean, the religious as well as the political environment into which Jesus was born was one that was definitely on the authoritarian mindset side of things, right? It was all about political power, but also religious power being imposed upon people. And those two sort of models, the authoritative and the nurturant, applied into that situation can help to explain an awful lot. Jesus came along as that nurturant heart of God that was standing up against all of that and opening up a different way. Throughout the Gospels, he shows us the way of love, as I say, in contrast to those who basically worshipped the way of power. Time and time again, his teaching and practice of love, of acceptance and forgiveness went completely against the grain of the authoritative religious leaders of his day and the culture that they upheld. Just read the Gospels. I mean, they're packed with wonderful examples of Jesus demonstrating the nurturing love of God to all manner of people on all sides of the social and political divisions of the time. He was there amongst the tax gatherers, who were the hated, people that were supporting their oppressors. He was there with the Pharisees. He accepted the hospitality of a leader amongst the Pharisees, but he was also there with the dropouts and the maligned and the ones on the edges. Jesus was the one who represented a different and better way that didn't get caught into, the categorizations of the time. Over and over and over again, he said to people, do not fear, do not be afraid. It's like a mantra that comes out over and over again with him. He literally lived the love of God on page after page of the Gospels, demonstrating that love is the way to cast out fear. Way back in the 1970s, I've told you this before, but I was part of and got caught up in something called the house church movement, which was very exciting, very promising to begin with. It was the most burgeoning thing on the church scene during that period of time. But it's strange how something which began with this sort of very nurturing, mutual, sort of empowering atmosphere, meeting in people's homes and supporting each other, it kind of evolved into this kind of structure of power, with big platforms and powerful egos speaking, and authority and power suddenly became terms that were characterizing what was going on, and the whole thing developed into this pyramidal structure, which, as it happens, I was kind of high up in that structural system, and yet all of my instincts were sort of taking me in the opposite direction. My gut told me this is all going wrong. Something that started out simple and supportive and nurturing had become an instrument wielding power and authority. I guess part of it is I'm not a natural authoritative kind of person. And so I ended up in, very painful conflict with my peers. I've talked about this in the shed before. And it led to a very difficult and painful split. But I knew that I was suffocating in that sort of coercive, power-driven, authority sort of atmosphere. I think it's important to be wary of any kind of church or religion that ends up banging on about authority, whether it's the authority of God, because rest assured, it never ends there. Or the authority of the Bible, or the authority of leaders. Why is it that there's obsession with authority, with something that is being asserted? That is not the way that Jesus showed us. Authoritarianism in religion, in politics, in the family, or whatever, is inherently a regressive movement away from the outpoured love of God in Christ, the one who never pursued any kind of authority apart from the immensely influential power of love. Well, I think there's enough to chew on there for now, isn't there? We're living in very crucial times, guys. And I think we need to know, where we stand in all of these things. So I'm going to finish here with a prayer for a different kind of world, for better people, for a better faith, for a better world. Prayer for a different kind of world. Here we go. Sometimes, dear God, this feels like a very scary, out-of-control world, ruled by silly, incompetent or dangerous people. That's definitely how I see it. Meanwhile, undeserving fat cats prosper, while the vulnerable and disadvantaged suffer, just because they are vulnerable and disadvantaged, while millions of others feel powerless to intervene. And then all these conflicts, any of which could spark a geopolitical conflagration, while leaders appear to trust drones, missiles and bloodshed more than the ancient, solemn art of negotiating, empathizing, conceding, compromising, turning enemies into friends, or at least collaborators. I sometimes wish you were that God which many claim, the superhero in the sky who at will could swoop in, fix Earth's troubles, beat up the bad guys, usher in utopia, hey presto. But even if you could, that is not your way. Vengeance, so-called redemptive violence, defeating power with even greater power, this is too much like the world we long to see the back of. Save us, we pray, from leaders with small minds and mean spirits. Strengthen the hands of those of whatever political persuasion who imagine a different, better way to resolve Earth's problems. Fill us all with passion for kindness and justice, and empower us to hope against hope, to lean daily into another future, divine love incarnate. Amen. Well, I don't know about you, but I'll drink to that. If you've got a glass of something handy, why don't you join me in a toast to a different kind of world, a different kind of human being, a different kind of religion, a different kind of God to the ones that we so often see. It's a matter of life and death, really. So to life, l'chaim. There you go. Thanks very much for joining me. If you like what I'm doing here in the shed, you can support us. You can buy us a coffee. You just have to follow the link on the screen or at the bottom of the page. And thank you so much to all of you who do support us and encourage us in that way and other ways too. The only thing to say is that on Wednesday I'm doing a Pause for Thought on Radio 2. It's on about 7:15, 7:20. But you can catch it on BBC Sounds later if you want to. And there it is. So in the light of all we've been saying, let's go out there and do our little bit to make the world a bit better. Be kind to people. Be kind to yourselves. Definitely stay human in the truest and best sense. And I'll see you soon. All right. Bye.